What you just heard was part of the opening bars to the fourth movement in Vaughan Williams' Third Symphony, also known as his Pastoral Symphony. His Pastoral Symphony is actually largely inspired by the time that he served in the military during World War I. And because of this, most of the music in this symphony has a somber kind of feel to it, which is not surprising. If you are not yet familiar with this work, do yourself a favor, go out and purchase a couple of different orchestra recordings of it. My personal favorite is the one recorded with Bryden Thompson and the London Symphony, although there are several other really good recordings available. Why did I choose this passage? Well, there's a couple of reasons why. Firstly, it's very moving. It has a somber feel, much like the rest of the symphony does. But there's a really interesting reason to me why I like this passage so much. Part of what he's doing here is he's using compound intervals to create unusual and subtle dissonances. These intervals that are larger than 1 octave are known as compound intervals. So for example, from this low F to this high F, that's 1 octave. But if we were to place an A above this high F, and if we measured the distance from the low F to this A, that would be a compound interval because it's more than 1 octave. But Vaughan Williams even stretches these dissonances more than 2 octaves apart, as you will see. Now, this passage begins with just the strings. We will first focus on just what is going on with the strings. The violins are playing this ascending melodic line, which is mostly made up of notes that are not in the F major chord. In the bottom we have an F major chord in the low strings, F, C, F, and A. The D in the violins would be the major 6th of the F chord, the E natural would be the major 7th, and the G would be the 9th. Then we briefly hit the A, which is the first time we hear a note that is part of the F major chord. So basically up until this point, all of these notes are like added notes to the F major chord. When we finally reach this D in the violins, this is the major 7th of the E flat major chord below in the low strings. Now, there is nothing unusual about a major 7th dissonance in contemporary music. However, this harmonic shift from F to E flat with this D does surprise your ear a little bit. But it's not until we get to this E natural in the high violins, that's where an unusual dissonance is first heard. The E natural is being played above the E flat major chord, but because it's over 2 octaves higher than the E flat in the chord, you don't really notice this dissonance. If, for example, I played this E natural in a lower octave, that would create a sound of a minor 9th interval within the chord. You can hear the dissonance as this is one of the most dissonant intervals that exists. And if we lowered it another octave down, it would create a minor 2nd clash with the E flat. This clash is even more obvious. But what Vaughan Williams knew was that if he put this note 2 octaves higher than the lowest root note of E flat, then it adds an interesting color to the chord without making it highly dissonant. Vaughan Williams continues this line in the strings with another unusual dissonance with the high A notes in octaves once again. The lower strings chord has now changed to a D flat major chord. The A natural in relation to the D flat It creates a minor sixth kind of sound. However, it is technically an augmented fifth. Just like with the previous chord, if we lowered this A down 2 octaves, it would clash quite a bit with the A flat note. But again, because this A natural note is placed so far away and so far above the lower A flats, almost no one would even notice this subtle dissonance. Now we're going to focus on the melody, which is being played in the English horn and the flute. And the melody also uses the same approach of masking the dissonance just as it did in the higher strings. But in this case, the melodies are only played about 1 octave higher than the lower strings. The lowest note of the melody in the English horn is the E natural, which clashes against the E flat major chord, but you don't really notice it because it's only heard for a split second with the 8th note. It's not sustained for a long duration. The A natural in the next part of the melody also creates a tritone dissonance against the low E flat of the chord, but this kind of dissonance is nothing unusual in modern music. And the G in the melody is the only note that's part of the actual E flat major chord, as it's the 3rd of the chord. And in the final moment of this, where we have the flute playing the melody, it's the same notes pretty much played by the English horn. But this time it's played against a D flat major chord. You might think the A natural would clash against the A flat in the strings, but it doesn't because the highest A flat is way down in the low strings, more than 2 octaves away from the A natural in the flute. The G against the A flat is no big deal because, again, that's just a tritone sound against the D flat root. But the E natural note is a little unusual because it would clash against the F if it were placed lower in the chord voicing. What that would create would be a D flat major chord with an added minor third, or what is known as a major minor triad. But again, because the E in the flute is placed a major 7th above the low F, it doesn't really stick out that much. Now, some of you may be asking, why did Vaughan Williams spell some of the notes in the unusual way that he did? Why does he have E naturals going against E flats and A flats, and A naturals going against A flats? Why is he doing that? Well, I think it's because he probably wasn't thinking about these notes in the melody in relation to the harmony below. In other words, he probably was not thinking of these notes as the minor 6th of the chord or the minor 9th. He was rather just thinking of them as their own separate tonal center, sort of like how a polychord works. But another thing is that it's a lot easier to read an E natural rather than an F flat, and it's certainly a lot easier to read an A natural instead of a B double flat. Just practically speaking here for the musicians, I think that's another reason. There have been many other composers that have used this spacing of compound intervals in their orchestration in order to create dissonances that sound very subtle. This allows us composers freedom from just sticking to the notes in the normal chord, while also giving listeners a chance to listen to something that's a little more fresh that they don't hear so often. The main point I'm trying to get across is that dissonant intervals lose a lot of their clash when you space them 1 or 2 octaves above a chord. The further you space a dissonant interval away from the chord, the less dissonance will be noticeable. And by using different instruments, like these woodwinds in this passage, it further hides the dissonance even more because the difference in timbre makes it even harder to notice the dissonance. The main point I'm trying to get across here is that there are unlimited harmonic possibilities available to you if you just know how to carefully voice your harmonies. Well, I hope you got something out of this video. Thank you for watching. I am composer Britt Andrew Burns, and I will see you again on the next video.